Alright, so in this video I want to talk about the session volume profile tool. I want to go over how I mark out the previous day levels with it and how I mark out ndPOCs with this tool. I know a lot of people use EXO charts for these levels, but I don't use EXO, I just use this tool, and I know a lot of people don't have EXO. So I'll first be going over how I mark out these levels, and I will then go over how I use them, how I use the previous day levels for my scalps, and how I use ndPOCs, how I prioritize which ndPOCs I focus on. So first things first, in order to get this indicator, you have to have paid TradingView. So I have made a video previously going over this tool, and I've also shown a way to mark out previous day levels without this tool. But yeah, it does require paid TradingView. So in order to get this tool, you just go into indicators and search session volume profile. And it is right here. There's also an HD version. I don't use this one. This one I think changes based on how much price action you have on screen. I prefer just the regular one because, you know, the ndPOCs and the volume areas still move depending on the time frame you're looking at it, but just like zooming in and out will not change them, which is what I don't like about the HD one. And basically what this is giving you is a fixed range volume profile for every day. So you can see that the profiles end and begin at 20 o'clock. And let me get on a 10-minute time frame so you can actually see this. They begin and end at 20 o'clock, which is when the daily candle is closed for me. So this is the end of, one day and the beginning of a next day. It's when the daily candle prints. And so this is just giving you a fixed range volume profile basically of the day. And you can see that if you just take a fixed range volume profile and you line it up with the daily candle open and bring it over to the daily candle close, so from 20 to 20, the value area is basically the same. It's pretty much exactly the same actually. Yeah, the value area low is exactly the same, so this is how you would want to mark these out if you do not have paid TradingView. You would just pull a fixed range volume profile from the daily candle open to the next daily candle open, and yeah, it gives you pretty much the same thing here. But this tool makes it a lot easier. You don't have to spend the time pulling volume profiles over each individual day. It does it for you. So now, in order to mark out the previous day levels, you will just go to yesterday's volume profile basically. And so that would be this volume profile right here. And in order to get the PD levels, I would just mark out the previous day value area high, which is coming in right about there. Mark that out with a horizontal line. I will mark out the point of control and the value area low, which is right about there. You can see I'm marking these out on the 10-minute. I like to use the 10-minute just for consistency because sometimes these value areas can shift slightly when you change time frames, especially once you get to the higher time frames. Like when you get to the 30-minute and up, they tend to shift a lot more. Like you can see right here, the value area high moved down a little bit, the value area low moved down a little bit, and then when you get higher, they start to really just not look anything alike. So I guess it has something to do with just the amount of candles that it's analyzing. I guess that changes the value areas a lot, but typically on the low time frames like the 15-minute and down, they're going to look very similar. And just for consistency, I like to stick to the 10-minute when I'm marking them out. And I have presets for these, so I can label this one PD value area high, this one PD POC, and this one PD value area low. And I clicked the wrong thing there. And yeah, that is basically how you mark out previous day levels. These levels are only valid for me until the daily candle closes, which is at 8 o'clock or 20 o'clock. So once the next value area prints, basically once the next daily candle prints, then I will adjust these levels to this value area. And I will go over more later how I use these levels. And I will have timestamps down below so you can skip around or go back to different chapters if you want. But yeah, that is how I mark out the previous day levels. So now moving on to marking out ndPOCs. So an ndPOC is just a daily point of control that has not been tapped since the day ended. So you can see pretty obviously we have one right here. The daily candle printed right here. Price was all the way up here. And since that daily candle closed, since this daily value area confirmed basically, or whatever you want to say, once it ended, price has not come back to touch this point of control. So it is an ndPOC, and these levels are typically reactive. A lot of people trade these. Some people just preset them. So, a lot of times you'll see once price hits it, it will get an immediate reaction. And I will go into more how I use them, but a lot of times, even if price is going to slice through it, you will see that it at least gets some kind of reaction from these levels. They are usually reactive on the first tap, and it is pretty easy to spot them. You're just looking for a point of control that has not been touched since it printed. So looking locally, it doesn't seem like there is any more. This one's been tapped. So you can see there aren't very many ndPOCs that I could mark out right now, at least not locally. And that is basically just because price has been moving sideways a lot. And this doesn't give a lot of opportunity to print ndPOCs. You kind of have to have like an aggressive move away from an area and then get an aggressive move back before the daily candle ends in order to get an ndPOC, or like this had the opportunity to become an ndPOC, but we actually tagged it right after the daily candle printed, and then we got the drop from there. But you can see we kind of hovered up here for 2 days, and we almost left an ndPOC here because right as the daily candle was printing, we started to get that drop away. So since there are no ndPOCs really to mark out here other than this one, we could go back farther and look for some back here, but you'll notice that the tool ends. It only prints a certain amount of daily value areas before it stops, so the tool only goes back a certain amount of time. But there is a fix to this. If you use the bar replay tool, you can go back in time, and then it will print a bunch more daily value areas. And so if I'm analyzing like past ndPOCs, kind of older ones, I will use the bar replay tool, and I usually like to mark out higher time frame ndPOCs the older they are. So usually if I have to use the bar replay tool, then I will just mark them out on the higher time frames. I found that the older the ndPOC is, usually the higher time frames become more significant than the lower time frame ones. And sometimes they line up perfectly. They don't always, differ. They're not always different, but sometimes they are. So if I'm marking out an old one, I usually like to mark it out on the 1 hour time frame. But we can go to the 10-minute and see if this one is any different, and it's not. It's the exact same. We also have one right here, it looks like. And I'm not sure if these are tagged. I don't know if price, tagged them later on. We'll find out, but for right now, I'm just marking them out. This one I feel like definitely got tagged, so I'm not going to bother with this one. But yeah, this is pretty much what I like to do when I'm marking out older ones. And let's go back to the 1 hour. This one didn't change at all, so we'll leave that there. And that's really all we can mark out in this area. There is also one all the way up here. This looks like the only other ndPOC, so I'll mark all of those out. And we'll X out of the bar replay tool and see if any of these have been tapped yet. So they have not. So we got some ndPOCs above us, and I would say all of these levels could be reactive. Usually, if there's like a bunch of ndPOCs, like sometimes when you get, a very large move to the downside when price is moving down for a lot of days in a row, sometimes you'll see ndPOCs kind of littered all over the place. And when that's the case, I usually don't pay attention to one specific ndPOC. I will usually then look for one in an area of confluence, an area that I was interested in for other reasons besides the ndPOC, because I found that when they are super crowded, when there's a bunch of ndPOCs in one area, that's usually when they just get sliced through. In this case, they're there's two kind of close to each other, but I would say that either one of these could still be reactive, If there was like a bunch in here, then maybe I would want to kind of narrow down my area of interest because, there's a chance that we just slice through them. But I'll talk about that more when I go over how I use these. But, basically that is how I mark out ndPOCs. If you want to mark out older ones, use the bar replay tool. Usually then I use higher time frames. If I'm marking out local ndPOCs, I like to use the lower time frames because they tend to be more accurate. So now let's talk about how I use previous day levels. So previous day levels, essentially, they are giving you the fair value of the price as of yesterday. And, it's very similar to range trading. The way I trade when I'm in a range is I'm looking at the value areas inside the range. I'm looking at essentially what is the fair price of the asset, at least in the context of this range. And typically, when price goes outside of those limits and you see some kind of confirmation, something saying that, price is becoming weak outside of the value area, that, there is kind of weakness in this move outside the value area. A lot of times that can lead to price coming back inside the value area. And there's also like range rotation theories where a lot of times when price gets acceptance back inside of a range, it will then rotate to the opposite side of the value area. Same thing kind of happened here. We fell back in, got acceptance in the range, we rotated to the opposite side. And those rotation theories can apply to previous day value areas as well. I treat them very similarly to just how I would treat a range. It's basically yesterday's range. So the way that I use these value area levels, the PD value area levels, is the same way I would use range levels, which that varies a lot. It depends on the context of what I'm trading, but I like to use these levels for a little bit more context, especially when I'm scalping. So I use these as scalp levels, and I only use them in the next day. So once the daily candle ends today, I'll have a new set of PD levels. These levels are only going to be valid for today. Unless, of course, the PD point of control is an ndPOC, then I consider it to still be valid throughout the next day, but in this case it's not. Like I said, I like to use these levels for just a bit of added confluence. A lot of times when we're in ranging conditions like we are right now, the PD levels are gonna, pretty much align with the range levels. Like you can see the PD value area low is right on top of the value area low of this range. The VAHs are right on top of each other. The point of controls are slightly different. You can see looking at this range, there is a high volume node right here, so it makes sense that this is the previous day point of control. And, there aren't really specific strategies that I use to trade these levels. I just treat them as ranges. So if price gets a move, outside the previous day value area, like we did right here, and I start to see signs of weakness, like, divergences, money flow coming out, volume decreasing, like a market structure shift, any sign of weakness really, then I may expect a rotation or at least a move back into the value area. And then if we get acceptance in here, maybe then a rotation. I basically just treat it the same way I treat a range. And just like with a range, if I'm going to be, taking aggressive trades off of a range level, like off the value area low, then I would want there to be confluence there, another reason for me to want to trade that level other than just, the value area low. So let's say, there was some confluence around the PD value area low, maybe like a low time frame order block, maybe a fib level like the 786, which I bet it would actually line up pretty nicely right now. And it's a little off, but, we'll just pretend like the 786 is right there. If there's a reason for me to think that this level would be reactive, and as price gets moved down there, we get confirmations, whatever it may be, divergences, liquidations, whatever you're using for your confirmations, then that is, one way I can create a trade idea with the PD levels. I'm pretty much just, considering them to be a range level. So, the same way I use a range, I would use the PD levels. Now, another way I like to use them is when price gets an aggressive move away from the previous day value area, and you start to see signs that the move is weak, like we kind of saw right here. when we started to see money flow increasing as we put in these lows. I know we had some divergences on this last low as we took out the wicks. And, you can see, yeah, the value area did stretch all the way down to here, but the point of control was way up here. The value area high was up here. I would say, like, the main part of the value area was coming in the upper section, and price was, well away from that. We had come way below the previous day value area, kind of excluding this part of it. Sometimes when you see signs that a move is weak after price moves away from what you would consider to be the fair value, maybe you would look at the point of control or like the area with the most volume yesterday. A lot of times that can, mean that price wants to retrace back to yesterday's fair value. And that's kind of what happened here. Also, you could say once price got acceptance back into the value area of yesterday, once we got back above the value area low, then we made a rotation to fill the value area. We got to move all the way up to the value area high and then some. So this is kind of range rotation rules working. We got acceptance back into the range. We got a rotation. And also, since price had moved far away from the fair value and we were oversold, it makes sense that price would come back to yesterday's fair value. So in a nutshell, the way I like to use PD levels is, the same way I like to use range levels. I like to find confluence around levels if I'm going to be, trading them directly, or I like to, just use them for extra confluence. If maybe, let's say we get a move outside of the value area, but then we see a market structure shift and we start to get acceptance back into it, then you can maybe hypothesize that we might get a rotation here. And you can create a trade idea off of that. If I'm going to be trading levels specifically, then I would want to have confluence or some other reason for me to want to trade that. Or I would want to see, some kind of clear signal to say that the level wants to hold. Like sometimes when I'm scalping, especially New York Open, since that's the first time I'm trading, really since the PD levels printed. Usually I don't trade much in Asia session, so come New York Open, let's say maybe we're holding the PD point of control as support, and then I start to see a lot of longs open up, like I see a large increase in volume on Coinalyze, a lot of longs opening up, then maybe I would just consider trading the PD point of control. For the most part, I like to look for confluence around the areas. I like to have other, trade ideas other than just, hoping that the PD levels hold. And now let's get into how I use ndPOCs. Just like with the PD levels, I like to prioritize ndPOCs that align with other ideas of mine. And ndPOCs can be reactive on their own, even if they don't line up with anything. But when they do line up with another idea of mine, that is when I found them to be the best. And, a great example would be this ndPOC right down here. This one lines up with the idea I was looking at in my last Bitcoin video. We have an 18-hour order block down there, as well as a 12-hour order block, which I have marked out right down here. And now I know that there is an ndPOC in this area as well, so there's a bit of added confluence to that idea. If this ndPOC was not in an area of confluence like this, I would, not prioritize it as much. I would not focus on it as much, but since there's good confluence there, then I would consider this to be a very significant ndPOC. And like I said, ndPOCs can be reactive on their own even when they don't have great confluence. And, I'm sure a lot of people have success just scalping ndPOCs, regardless of where they are, because a lot of times you do see reactions off of these levels. I mean, maybe presetting ndPOCs is a winning strategy. I personally don't do that, but I have noticed that usually when we come down to hit an ndPOC, you will see a reaction even if we're going to go straight through it later. But I personally like to, create other ideas around my ndPOCs. I don't just, scalp the reaction off of them. So for local ndPOCs, I like for them to have confluence with my local ideas. For more longer term ndPOCs, like, some of these ones I marked out up here, I would like there to be some longer-term ideas present in that area, like maybe an order block up in this area, Or, I mean, I guess you could say we could grab this liquidity up here and hit this ndPOC. That's a possible idea. But I would want there to be something other than just the ndPOC, especially the higher time frame ones. Because while I found that, you can just blow straight through local ndPOCs, more often than not, it is the, higher term ones that get blown through more often. Something like this, I could see us just shooting straight up through these, not really paying attention to these because there is liquidity right above them. So if it's a higher time frame ndPOC, I want there to be high time frame confluence around there. And yeah, again, in a nutshell, it comes down to confluence. The more confluence I have around the ndPOC, the more I'm going to prioritize it. All right, well, that is about it for this one. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Really appreciate the support. And I will see you all in the next video.